blur how fast the seasons change and how fast time goes. I guess we just aren't even cognizant of it. In the wintertime, we can't wait for the summertime. And now it's here and it's going by in a blur. You know, um, but we're going to talk about this whole affirmative action situation and being struck down. TP and I, we grew up as part of that. Um, we're part of that era where affirmative action came into play. I can remember being bused in Brooklyn, New York. From my neighborhood, I was sent to the other side of Brooklyn. Someone thought that the educational process would be better in a all-white neighborhood for a black child. I don't know if the education was better. I think the fact that it was just inequality in the system that still exists to this very day. You go to some of these inner city schools, they don't have adequate computers. Teachers are sometimes second rate. Facilities are in a state of disrepair. So the same thing that's happening now happened, over 50 years ago when this legislation began to take shape. Now, I want to qualify something. A lot of people have said over the years, a lot of people simply did not support affirmative action. I'm talking specifically about a lot of people in the white community who were upset about the affirmative action legislation. They said it was, quotas and giveaways and things of that nature. So let me say unequivocally that the black community did not ask for affirmative action. That is what we were given. It was not something that we would request. There was so much more that we wanted. So many of our leaders, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and so many others gave their lives. And they certainly didn't give their lives for some quotas. And that's so that some of us can get a job and some of us can escape the ghetto. That was not the plan. The plan was all or none. So this is something that was thrust upon the black community. And it did not go far enough. It was a step, but it wasn't a huge step. And now that's been struck down. Two black justices on the Supreme Court. Well, let me say one and a half black justices on the Supreme Court. Ketanji Brown, Justice Brown, was of course in favor of the legislation. The half dude, Clarence Uncle Thomas, of course, has been voting against any piece of legislation related to affirmative action. In fact, he has said publicly that he benefited from affirmative action, but now that he's in a position of authority, he's slamming the door and making sure that it stays closed and that no one else seeps through the cracks. So, what does that mean for Black America? How much have we benefited from affirmative action? Yeah, the reality is it opened up some opportunities for jobs and civil service and things of that nature. But the reality is Black and brown people were not the major beneficiaries of the affirmative action legislation. In fact, for the most part, others have greatly benefited in many respects to our detriment. And almost in the same breath, the Supreme Court also said that the Biden administration student loan forgiveness program is unconstitutional. You know, to me, we live in a country where they want to have gender affirming care for minors. In other words, You're going to allow a minor to have a sex change. A minor, someone under the age of 18, that same child can't get higher education because, especially if you're black or brown, because now, according to the Supreme Court, colleges and universities do not have to consider race in the admissions process. So that's going to limit the number of black and brown applicants who get into these colleges and universities. So you can go get a sex change in some states. They're pushing for that. Higher education will be more complicated nowadays. And for the rank and file black or the average black person who would use the affirmative action legislation as a stepping stone, now what? Yes, this day was bound to come. Anything that the government gives, the government can take back. And they've been taking it back incrementally at first. Now it's like Pac-Man. It is gobbling it up. You know, TP and I were born the same year. The same year that they signed the Voting Rights Act. The year that we came around. So for us, those of our generations, our grandparents were first allowed to vote in some states in this country when we were born. Something that other people relied upon for generations, for decades. Well, 58 years ago, my grandparents were legally allowed to cast their vote for the first time. Nobody thought that the Civil Rights Act would ever be challenged, that there were, I guess, any serious challenges to the Voting Rights Act, that this was something that would basically be etched in stone, but it's not. The Civil Rights Act has to be re-ratified, or the Voting Rights Act, rather, has to be re-ratified over the years. I forget how many years it is that it has to be re-ratified, but it's never really been signed into law. And here we are in the 21st century, and our Congress has yet to pass an anti-lynching law. So when you don't sign legislation to prevent people that look like TP and I from being lynched, you don't sign the George Floyd policing legislation, and now you take away affirmative action, at least as it relates to education in this country. What exactly is the government saying to us? What have they been saying to us for years? And, one thing Black folks love, and that is the Democratic Party. Now, I don't want to make this about politics, but the reality is, if it were not for the Black vote turning out in places like Philadelphia, the suburbs of Atlanta, so many other these suburban areas, it is not possible for Joe Biden to sit in the White House. Let me say that again. Without massive Black voter turnout, Joe Biden does not win the White House. And look, I know there are some people who still say, well, he didn't win. That Trump won, right? Well, I haven't seen any proof that Trump won this election. I don't think the Supreme Court has seen any proof that Trump won the election. In fact, many of these justices were appointed by Donald Trump. Many of these circuit judges appointed by Donald Trump, they found no evidence that he won. So right now, who's sitting in office is Joe Biden, supported by massive Black voter turnout. And all of these promises that were made to Black and brown communities, poor communities, where is it? Where are all these promises that are made? When is this stuff going to come to fruition? I'm not saying that folks should leave the Democratic Party in mass. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying hold them accountable. If you're going to make a promise, a man is only as good as his word. If you're going to make a promise, keep a promise. If you're going to tell students that you're going to forgive their debt, hell, we forgive debt every day. We forgive debt to major corporations. We forgive debt from other countries. Why can't we forgive the debt of the students in this country who are only trying to get adequate secondary education or higher education? Why is it that in 2008, when the economy collapsed and corporations says, hey, look, guys, we're too big to fail. You need to empty out the U.S. Treasury and give it to us. There was no hesitation. Within weeks, the checks were being written to major corporations, some of them not even in this country. All of that money, how do we know it was repaid? We're not part of the government accounting office. We didn't see any check stubs. We didn't see any money was returned. So how do we know that these corporations actually paid the government back? All we know is what they tell us. So we can forgive corporations that don't pay a red cent in taxes anyway. Why can't we support these students in their endeavor to get a college education? Again, some states in this country, they're pushing for gender affirming care. So in other words, yeah, go get your sex changed. But higher education, nah, we can't do that. You know, for the youth now coming along who want to go to college and who, I guess, hope that affirmative action will open up doors and opportunities for them. Now what? Over the years, it has become more and more restrictive access to things like funds for college. You know, TP, you remember back in the good old days, TAP and Pell?
That's right.
Listen, you went to college, right? You applied for your TAP, you applied for your Pell, and you got it.
Didn't have to pay it back.
Did not have to pay it back. And I mean, you knew when the checks came in because everybody went and got them some fly gear. You paid your tuition,
That's right.
but you got you some fly gear, right? You was chilling. Now, what do?
No such thing.
Well, they have programs that were supposed to replace Tap and Pell, but it really doesn't. So the numbers across this country in terms of university attendance for Black and brown people is bound to dwindle. And what are we going to do? I mean, we have so many young people that have fallen through the cracks out in the street hustling to make a living. For some of those kids, there was a very real possibility that some of them could have went to college and turned their life around. Now, that's gone. And for the Biden administration, what are you going to do to replace this? You know, you promised tuition forgiveness. Well, that's out the window. Affirmative action is out the window. So we're entering, next year will be, another presidential election, a general election. Why should we vote to reelect Joe Biden? And look, I get it, right? Our choices are slim. You have, on one hand, you have the current president, Joe Biden, and even there are Democrats that do not want Joe Biden to seek reelection. They're saying, hey, we need some new blood, some new ideas. And I second that motion. Yes, we don't need another 4 years of Biden. Does that mean we need another 4 years of Trump? Absolutely not.
Well, for me, if I had to choose, if the choice came down between Trump and Biden, unfortunately, it's going to be Biden for me.
I get it, right, and that's the sad state of affairs in politics in this country, that we have to choose between the lesser of two evils. What it comes down to is who is going to hurt me less, not who is going to improve the lives of the average Americans, protect the average American or protect the American people. Who is going to do less damage? And that's the choices we have to make in this country. And it's ridiculous for a country of this size. If you walk into McDonald's, you have more choices on the McDonald's menu than for who will run this country for the next 4 years. Who will be the leader of or so-called leader of the free world for the next 4 years? More choices on the McDonald's menu. We talk about these other countries where we say it's not a real democracy. I'm questioning the fact, is this a real democracy? And if so,
No, it's not.
well, when did it become a democracy? I remember going to school, and we were told in school when this country was founded and they were deciding on who would vote, they said you had to be three things: rich, a landowner, and you had to be white, a white male. How is that a democracy? How can you say it's a democracy when only a small percentage of the population is allowed to vote? And here we are, centuries later, and the right to vote is being so greatly restricted. You know, down in, I want to say Mississippi, I believe it's Mississippi, the Supreme Court down there just overturned some voting districts that were being heavily gerrymandered by the Republicans. And there's one other state, same thing, I think it's North Carolina, where heavy Republican gerrymandering had basically negated the black vote. So now those lines are being redrawn. How do we allow this to happen in the first place? In a democracy, how do we allow this to happen? When George Bush ran the first time against Al Gore, down in Florida, black folks were being systematically purged from the rolls. People that have been voting at the same polling place for years were basically told, you're not on the rolls anymore. People who had been incarcerated, who had regained their right to vote, all of a sudden saw those rights stripped away again. So I guess we, members of the black and brown community, should have seen this coming. But we did not have and don't have to this day a contingency plan. We just are under the belief that the Democratic Party, those that the vast majority of us support, are going to do things in our best interest. And I think that is really naive. And I think we're seeing the results of that naivete now, that affirmative action, at least in terms of education, no longer exists. And
that's the prelude to the kiss after that altogether.
Brother, you hit the nail on the head. If you can strike down affirmative action in colleges and universities, what's next? Because people have been railing all along that this is a quota system. And the government would offer funding to those who would hire minorities, some sort of benefit to that company. What happens when they take away that benefit or that incentive to hire black and brown? What happens then? In this country, we keep talking about our economy is strong, but is it really? We keep talking about job creation. I saw the other day where they're talking about the number of jobs that have been created in a month of May or June. But where are these jobs? When you talk about job creation, are we talking about Amazon jobs? Are we talking about jobs at a high tech job? We're talking about jobs in, say, the technology sector. We talk about jobs in terms of, say, artificial intelligence. Are we talking about jobs at places like Walmart and Amazon? See, they'll tell you that jobs are being created, but they won't tell you where the jobs are or the type of jobs that are being created. So it just seems that for Black and brown people, there's a clear signal here, that, well, what was given is being taken back. And what what do we do about it? You know, how do we, realistically in this country, once rights are taken, they never come back. And that's the sad reality in America. You know, for those of us who were born prior to the events of 9/11, we can remember the time prior to the TSA when you didn't have to strip almost naked to go through uh, a checkpoint to board an aircraft. And if you think about it, years ago, prior to the TSA, how many incidents were there on aircraft? How many hijackings were there? Now that we have the TSA and this huge government bureaucracy, you see every day where there are incidents at airports and on aircraft. So are we really protecting the traveling public? Or are we just being more intrusive into the lives of the American people? And those rights that we had prior to 2001, they're never coming back. The Patriot Act is still on the books. And until we get some sensible people in Washington, D.C., it's going to remain on the books. More and more of our rights are going to be stripped away. You would think in this country that education should be a right afforded everyone, but that's simply not the case. Today, they don't even teach cursive writing in school anymore. Schools across this nation have decided, well, it's not necessary. We have a document called the Constitution of the United States. That's supposed to be some of the founding principles of this nation. And yet, you can take a high school graduate, having graduated from high school in this country, and they will not be able to read the signatories of the U.S. Constitution because they're not taught to read cursive writing. They're not taught to um, write a check and sign their name. Okay, we say checks. No one does that anymore. But does that mean you shouldn't know how? Okay, I don't write checks anymore. I'm sure TP doesn't write a whole lot of checks anymore. Everything is computerized. But if there would be a glitch in the system, we can still pull out a checkbook and write a check. What happens for these young people if there's a glitch in the system? What happens if, say, the auto sign on the computer system doesn't work? What then? So for people of, as I said, my generation, TP generation, we saw the implementation of affirmative action. I talked about the busing. We saw opportunities opening up that before were simply non-existent. There were Black folks that moved into the civil service, you know, things that before were very, very limited. Yes, growing up in New York, You would see, black police officers, um, black correction officers, black EMTs and paramedics. It was a very small minority. Once the affirmative action legislation took hold, you would see a few more, right, entering into those fields. No, the floodgates did not open, and every black person was given an opportunity to go into the civil service. A lot of people in the white community looked upon affirmative action as being a giveaway. But in terms of the legislation itself, what exactly was given? What did all black people in this country get? I've heard arguments, people talk about welfare and these social programs. Well, welfare did not benefit one particular group. In fact, statistically, most of the people on welfare across this country are Caucasian. So let's just take that out of the equation. What else, how else rather, did affirmative action benefit black and brown people in this country? Yes, there were few jobs. Yes, during that time, you could consider race in the admissions process for colleges and universities. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot. You know, we talk about, or black and brown people talk about how far we've come. But when we see the makeup of the Supreme Court, when we see affirmative action being stricken down, when we see um, where there is voter suppression across this country, when you see George Floyd dying with a knee on his neck, you ask yourself, have we really come so far? Or are we now heading in the wrong direction? Clearly, something is wrong. And I don't think we're going to find the answers from the Biden administration. And again, I'm not advocating for anyone to leave their political party. That's not the problem. The problem in this country is we just don't hold anybody accountable. We're not holding Joe Biden accountable. We didn't hold Donald Trump accountable. We don't hold Congress accountable. You know, we live in a country where we want to, and I'm not saying all state legislatures are in support of this, but I know that there are people in the federal government want to consider legislation that will make it, or that would provide gender affirming care. I know I'm kind of circling back to that, but of all the gifts, the lasting legacy that we can give to America's youth, is that what we want to do? Is that what we want to provide for America's youth? You know, we're talking about young people. Like everybody else, young people change their minds. You know, I'll use my wife as an example. My wife loves a good shopping spree. And like many women, it's called retail therapy. She'll drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to a mall, get in the mall and go from one store to the other. And of course, what spurs that on is, even though we have a walk-in closet with tons of clothes, if there's an event or vacation time, you walk into that closet and say, you know what? I don't have anything to wear. Okay. So now, because in this closet, which is loaded with clothes, Now there's nothing where. Got to take that hour and a half, 2 hour trip to the mall. You get there and you go again from store to store. Finally, something catches your eye. You take it off the rack, you look at it, you put it up against you to see how it looks, how it feels. You take it into the dressing room, you try it on, you look in the mirror, see if it looks good on you. You come out, you show your cohorts, your co-shopping crew, and they give you the thumbs up. You buy it, leave the mall, drive an hour and a half, 2 hours home. The next day you decide, I don't like this. I'm gonna take it back to the mall. Another hour and a half, 2 hour trip. And we're talking about mature adult women who decide that this is something they want to have, that they need on Saturday. And on Sunday, they don't want it anymore. So what happens with these young people whose minds are constantly changing as they develop? What happens to the 14-year-old that decides, you know what, I want to go through this gender affirming treatment? And they begin the process. What happens at the age of, say, 15 or 16, when what they wanted at 14, they no longer want at 16? This surgery is irreversible. And I've heard arguments where people say, well, you know, transgender youth have a higher rate of suicide um, than the general population. It is a tragedy. I get it. However, in this country and around the world, people die and children are people. And yes, it hurts. It is a sad state of affairs when we see our young people dying. However, we don't protect them in their schools. We can count on a number of school shootings every year. And what are we doing about that? We don't protect people in their houses of worship, in their homes, and we're talking about children. And yet, we want to, how are we protecting them? By giving them something that they're definitely going to, or they may change their minds down the road. And then you have, again, mature adults who say, I gotta have this, I want this. And in a couple of weeks, it's not as important as it was before. So people's minds change. And these young people, yeah, I mean, nobody thinks, well, I shouldn't say no one, but for the most part, the way you think in elementary school may not be the same way you think in junior high school. You're not going to think the same way in high school if you're developing normally. And you're not going to think the same way in college as you did in high school. So mind change is an evolutionary process. And yet we want to target minors, people under the age of 18, whose minds are constantly going to change as they develop. So I just think that, well, I know that in this country we're heading in the wrong direction. And we're not getting a lot of support or even common sense from DC, from Washington, from our leadership, if you can call it that. Leaders are supposed to lead, but where exactly are we being led? When you look at this country, we say we are the world's lead nation, right? Our president is called the leader of the free world. But now, strategically, how do you maintain your strategic superiority when you think countries like India, exploding population. They just surpassed China. China, population explosion. Parts of Africa, populations are exploding. In America, because of things like difficulty in women conceiving, take that in and add in that the fact that we are rewriting the books as it relates to gender roles. We're basically, or there's a push to do away with gender roles. So if you have children that are born male transitioning to female, children that are born female transitioning to male, for years America's population has either declined or remained stagnant. How do you maintain strategic superiority? Countries with exploding populations, what they need is land, what they need is resources. And if you think that there's tension between America and China and America and Russia now, what happens as the resources continue to dwindle? Make no mistake about it, wars are fought all the time for resources. Oh yeah, they tell us that we're battling terrorism, that we're fighting um, against what they call the war on terror. No, we were fighting for resources. We were fighting to protect the oil companies, the major oil companies. We're fighting because places like Afghanistan, the number one producer of poppy. So we're fighting to protect the heroin shipments, the heroin crop rather. But for America, if our birth rates are stagnant or in a state of decline, how do you fend off a country like China? The Chinese are everywhere. You go to Africa, they're there. You go to Central South America, they're there. You go to Europe, oh yeah, they're there too. How do you fend them off? We call, our government says that, well, they're the enemy. But you go into a place like Walmart, where did the electronics come from? Where did the food from? China has bought up companies like Smithfield. You look at some of these buildings in Manhattan, who owns them? You
Well,
look at,
who owns the debt of the United States government?
oh yeah,
China.
that too. The major portion of our debt underwritten by the Chinese. So how do you allow your enemy to underwrite your debt, to feed you, to clothe you, to sell you electronics and everything else? Just about everything in Walmart. Look at where it's made. Look at where your clothing is made. Look at where your athletic footwear is made. So are they really the enemy? And if they are, how do you beat an enemy that, one, is providing all of those things like your food, like providing America the opportunity to keep its economy afloat? So, the reality is that unless there's some drastic changes in this country rather, we're in serious trouble and on so many levels. And I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what so-called black leadership has to say now that affirmative action has been struck down by the Supreme Court. I'd like to hear what some of them are going to have to say now. Where do we go from here? Where do they see um, black and brown people in terms of this loss for the students who want to go to college, who had, race considered? What now? It'd be interesting to see or to hear what they have to say. Because now, I saw something the other day, we're talking about the HBCUs, if more talented students of color went to HBCUs as opposed to the larger schools, power would shift away from these colleges and universities that have these huge endowments to the HBCUs. And then you would see a place like Jackson State, where Coach Prime was for a period of time. You see their endowments increasing, which would open up more opportunities for people to go to college to get, that education. But will that happen? We've got to come up with a plan now that affirmative action, or that portion of affirmative action, no longer is on the books. What's the contingency plan now? Where do we go from here? What do we do for these students that want to go to school? What do we do in terms of what's coming after this decision? Because if you take away, the government is all about subtraction from working class people. It's never addition, it's subtraction. So if they're taking away that section of the affirmative action law, what else are they going to take away? And you can believe this is not something that just happened. This is something that people have been complaining about since the 1960s and 70s. In probably the mid 70s, you heard for the first time you heard about a phenomenon called reverse racism, where people were saying, white men in particular were saying, hey, I'm being denied access to better paying jobs because they're giving it to black and brown people because there's a quota. I'm being denied access to colleges and universities because slots are being given to black and brown people. So for years, it has been this very vocal group that has been railing against affirmative action. And now it seems as if affirmative action is in the crosshairs of the Supreme Court. And you would think at a time when you have probably the largest number of minorities and women on the Supreme Court, that these long held laws would have a chance. Supreme Court is made up of some of the most conservative people on the planet. They're so conservative that they will strike down affirmative action as it relates to education, but they're not conservative enough to report that they're receiving gratuities from wealthy people that do business before the court. We know about Clarence Thomas and his lavish vacations on the dime of some rich donor who also, I think he bought his mother's house, didn't he, TP?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, nothing wrong there, right? That's legal, right? And we just heard about another justice, same thing. These lavish gifts. Don't report nothing.
Don't have to.
These are the people that are making the laws or interpreting the laws.
Well, the sad part is about, Clarence Thomas is a very, very sad individual. You know why?
Why is that?
Because as I did my research on Clarence Thomas, he was very pro-black in the days of his youth.
Really? What happened to him?
He was even a follower of Elijah Muhammad.
What happened to him?
He was one of those kids who didn't get picked on the basketball court. You know what I mean? He just didn't fit in. No matter where he went, he just didn't fit in. So finally, he realized that if you can't beat him, join him. And he switched sides because he figured y'all don't want me over here, but y'all can't do nothing for me anyway. I'm trying to help y'all. So I'm gonna go over here with them. And that's what he pretty much did.
Well, you know what?
Do the research on him. It's gonna blow your mind.
Well,
Because when I found out he was a follower of Elijah Muhammad,
mm-hmm.
and all the things he did for civil rights and what he was all about,
mm-hmm.
I had to say, how did we get from there to here? You know what I mean? Even down to choosing the wife he chose. How did we get from here to there? Now, you know who you love. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
But how'd you get from one extreme to the next? You know what I mean?
You know, I'll tell you something, right? I remember when Clarence Thomas was nominated for the Supreme Court. And during that time, there was the accusations made by Anita Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching the hearings, the confirmation hearings.
I remember those too.
And, you know, during that time, I said, man, why is Anita Hill doing this? We have a black man that has an opportunity to get onto the Supreme Court, and they went and got one of his own to go after him. Well, in hindsight, Anita Hill, I am deeply sorry. Now, looking back, you know, we didn't have all the information. We didn't know who Clarence Thomas was or what he would become. So, Anita Hill, if you're listening, I am sorry. You know, we just did not know the destructive nature of this man. We did not know the self-hatred this man held, you know, in his heart and deep in his psyche for his own people. Right now, I'm almost willing to bet Clarence Thomas could not fit in with the average black person. The only people he would be able to fit in with is people like himself, black people like himself,
mm-hmm.
that have these destructive thoughts about their own people. So you'll never see Clarence Thomas at a family barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
Not people that look like him.
He gave up on that because, in his own words, he wasn't black enough.
Well,
in his own words, he wasn't black enough.
Well,
and you know what? Sometimes when your own people reject you, that's hurtful.
It is.
It's hurtful. You know what I mean? And he just could not forgive those people who rejected him. You know what I mean? And he has painted us all with the same brush. You know, so he had given up on the black race altogether. He did. He gave up on the black race. You know what I mean?
Well, that's clear in his decisions, right? If you read his decisions and his opinions, he has said publicly for a number of years how he was against affirmative action.
Because he didn't want nobody else to come up.
And this is something that he also says he benefited from.
Mm-hmm.
So if you benefited from it, and it was good enough for you to get an education so that you could sit on the Supreme Court, what about the next generation of young black and brown people who are seeking those same opportunities?
What about
and let's be realistic, right? Now, you and I grew up in New York.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time when City College was free.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think when they started, when they added tuition, I think it was $5 for a semester, right? So you can go to school for an entire year for $10. The same people that benefited from free or reduced tuition are now the same people that are pushing to raise the tuition rates so that it is unaffordable for so many people. Somebody like Rudolph Giuliani, right? The dude that sweats, I guess that's motor oil or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this dude went to City College for free, or he paid $5. Now he's saying the tuition rates are too low. So now the people that would go to City College and we use that as a pathway, right, to success, well, that door is closed.
Mm-hmm.
And Clarence Thomas, this dude is like the guy at the bank, folks, right, that closes the door and then
Mm-hmm.
spins the lock so that
Make sure it's locked.
to make sure it's locked. That's Clarence Thomas. He's the gatekeeper, for white America. Him and there's a handful of others that are the gatekeepers because a lot of things that Caucasian people would be accused of being racist for saying or even thinking, Clarence Thomas said, "Well, I'll say it for you."
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to say I'm racist. So Clarence Thomas is that gatekeeper, and it's just mind-boggling how you will say, "I benefited. This helped me to get where I am. I could not sit on the Supreme Court had it not been for affirmative action."
Mm-hmm.
And yet now I'm looking at it saying, "Yeah, we don't need this anymore."
Yeah.
Well, what world do you live in? I mean, does he think that America is fair? And I'm not just talking about for black and brown people. I mean fair to anybody that's poor and working class.
Hey, it's the haves and the have-nots.
And that's what it amounts to, right?
And see, see, so many people get caught up on race and nationality and religion, and it's not, you know, and it's the classes,
Right,
you know what I mean?
right.
See, we have sugarcoated here in America and made it seem like it's a racial thing or it's a religious thing. No, it's the same thing.
Right.
It's a class system,
Mhm.
and if you don't have it, you're not going to get it.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Just like right now, they have slow walked all these young adults, these young kids to not become homeowners.
Right.
They feel, they just want to rent. No, because the 1%, the 2%, the 3%, even up to the 5%, they want to own everything and they
Right.
want you to rent
Hmm.
because they want to keep all the money.
They sure do.
You know what I mean? And they're putting the propaganda out for you to fall in line. And they're controlling your mind with social media and everything else. They tell you what they want you to do. And like sheep and cattle, you follow them.
Absolutely.
So it's a class system. You know what I mean? And it's like I look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a genius. He's a genius. Oxymoron. Like you know what? He's not dumb. He's just stupid. You know why I say that? Because if he didn't say the stupid things that he do, he could hoodwink the entire world.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Because he's so fear of a black planet. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And everybody bought into it, right? But then he turned around and say some of the dumbest things that people are ashamed of.
Hmm.
That people, you woke up the sleeping giant, right? But that wasn't enough for him. He kept pushing the envelope to a point where the uneducated who are willing to go to be your army, it just isn't enough for them. But those people who are in a lot of these high places, who have gotten to know the people that you call murderers and rapists and undesirables and people should be murdered and locked away, well, they got black and brown children in their families.
Hmm.
They have relationships with these people, right? So they're ashamed of some of the things that you say, Donald Trump. So if you didn't say all those things, they supported you because they voted for you.
Right.
Right? But once you pushed the envelope and kept going, and going. Now they had the backwards.
That, you know,
That's why he lost the election.
you said something interesting. You said Donald Trump is a genius.
Yes, he's a
Right.
genius.
No, you don't really think of him in terms of being a genius, but Donald Trump, and I've said this and I wrote about this on my blog. I said that Donald Trump is akin to Adolf Hitler.
Mhm.
Not in the sense that he's putting people in concentration camps or ovens and nothing like that. I say he's akin to Trump, to Hitler rather, in terms of being charismatic,
Yes.
right? Adolf Hitler never went to college. Adolf Hitler was a private and worked his way up to corporal in World War One. He had no training or proper military training in terms of tactics, organization. Um, he didn't know any of that stuff, but he knew how to connect with people.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what they wanted to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And Donald Trump is the same way. He knows how to connect with people. He knows what they want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be realistic. Donald Trump was born with a silver spoon, no, a platinum spoon in his mouth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yet he can go out to middle America where people are earning maybe, $10 an hour, and he can connect with those people. And he can make those people feel like I'm just like you. I understand your frustration. I understand your anger. I understand your fear. And I'm here to tell you it's not going to happen on my watch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing. History repeats itself, right? We saw this happen in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Hitler just didn't rise to power in a vacuum. It took time and world events that placed him in that position where he could be the Führer of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing happened in this country. Events, some external, some internal, that created an opportunity for somebody who was the apprentice to run for president and to win.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows you.
Well, see, you know what? It was right timing for him to do what he did. You know why? Because we know he wasn't the best man for the job, right? But we also knew that Hillary Clinton came with baggage.
Yeah.
And because she came with baggage, that was going to be the albatross, because we know they looted a lot of countries and they stole money.
Oh, her and Bill, they looted Haiti.
Yes.
All that money that was earmarked to, rebuild Haiti.
Right.
That went, the money was given to the Clintons to administer.
Right.
Right. And of course, that money disappeared.
Right.
Right.
So everybody knew they was crooked as the letter S. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody paid attention to how crooked Donald Trump was. Everybody was so concerned with not having the Clintons in power again that superseded common sense.
Right.
It superseded common sense. That we know this man ain't shit from top to bottom. We know.
But now you said common sense. Now we got to be careful because common sense ain't common anymore.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
But again, she just wasn't the right person based upon the Monica Lewinsky situation, the Haiti situation, and he had something to run the hammer on.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And he was a celebrity.
And you know something? I just think that there was a dislike of Hillary Clinton going back to when Bill was in the White House.
Yes.
Right. I think that Hillary Clinton was viewed as,
Anything, boy.
well, not just that. A lot of people in this country don't like an outspoken woman. They think that a woman ought to stay in their place. And I think that a lot of men in this country did not like Hillary Clinton because they thought she was behind the scenes manipulating Bill Clinton. You know what I mean? And she was kind of leading Bill around by the nose, like that she was the one calling the shots. And I don't think, well, I know they didn't like that.
Well, listen.
Mhm.
After that Ronald Reagan diabolical, I'm sure they would feel that way because we know that when Ronald Reagan was sick, it was said that Frank Sinatra and Nancy was the shot callers.
Well, Nancy definitely was, because let's be realistic. Um, when Reagan was elected, he was in his 70s already, right? And now, in hindsight, they're saying that his mental capacity was diminishing, you know. And by his second term, you know, it was clear that there were some difficulties there. And Nancy stepped in as his protector, right? You know, because she knew there were some vulnerabilities. There's some mental vulnerabilities and things of that nature. So she wanted to protect her husband, and she went to great lengths to do that. But Reagan was a very, very popular president, right? He was called a great communicator, which is interesting for somebody who I guess suffered from Alzheimer's. How do you communicate and you have something like Alzheimer's or dementia?
But guess what?
Yeah.
Again, just like Donald Trump, he was a celebrity. He was a celebrity.
He was.
You know what I mean? There was name recognition. You know what I mean? And with Donald Trump, because there was name recognition, and he was a funny guy. To watch him on The Apprentice, he was a character.
He was.
I enjoyed watching him on The Apprentice. You know what I mean? He was a character.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? He was truly a character. So that's what America bought into because he had name recognition, and everybody thought that he was a great businessman.
But you know what? What people fail to realize is that that's scripted, right? You don't just
You
go.
know it. I know it.
Exactly. You don't just get on TV, right? And there's no script, no production, nothing like that. Right?
No writers, no nothing.
Exactly.
Right?
All of this is scripted and prepared, right? So it's not a surprise when you say you're fired. You know you're getting fired. You read the script.
Mm-hmm.
But, in America, right? What we see on TV, what we hear on the radio, what we see on, our computers and smartphones, it becomes our reality.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really do much in the way of fact checking. We don't believe in doing research to find out if what is being said is true.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's said on certain media outlets, and I won't mention any names, but once you see it there, well, it's true, right? And now what I do, I'll surf from one news outlet to the other just to see the different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the same issue, but one from the standpoint of a so-called liberal outlet, the other from a so-called conservative outlet. And one will of course support one party, left-leaning outlets, and then you have another one like, I won't mention names, but they will support right-wing the Republican Party and right-wing values and things of that nature. It's not news.
Nope.
This is not new. This is indoctrination.
Mm-hmm.
This is people telling you. And what I always found interesting, okay, so the president will come on and they'll give a presidential debate, or the president will come on and do an address. As soon as the president finishes, somebody will come on and tell you what you heard. I don't need you to tell me what I heard. I got ears. I don't need you to explain to me. Listen, I went to school. I can hear and I can form my own opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is not to let you form your own opinion. Let me give you an opinion. Let me tell you what you just heard.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously you didn't hear it properly. So let me reiterate it to you so that you will see things the way I want you to see them. Exactly. So this is not news. This is indoctrination. You know what I mean? This is the stuff that we read about in the book 1984. We thought it was a joke. You know, he showed people looking at these huge screens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Nowadays, you go into any of these electronic stores, 80-inch screens and bigger, right? And people sit there for hours staring at these screens. We thought George Orwell was like maybe using cocaine or something, but no, he was dead on.
That's right.
You know, but I just think now it'd be interesting to hear what so-called Black leadership has to say now that affirmative action has been stricken down, now that the Biden administration is not able to carry forth its promise of student loan forgiveness. I think now we need to begin to organize and make some plans, some contingency plan, because we're going to have a lot of Black youth, brown youth who are going to be rejected, whose applications are going to be rejected when they apply for colleges and universities.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do with them? What are we going to do with our youth? So we got to come up with a plan. And, you know, we need to put pressure on our politicians. We got to hold them accountable. We can't just let them get into office and just forget about them and then wait 4 years and vote for them again. There's got to be some accountability. Right. So, folks, I thank you for tuning in, for listening. And we hope to see you right back here next Saturday. Hopefully, my partner in time will be back, Romane. Again, she's dealing with some serious issues. So please keep on your thoughts and your prayers. You know, and it's just good to sit and kick it with the mastermind. You know, we always have some insight that you're not going to hear in so many other places. And I just want to mention for those of you who may be in the area, August 26th, that's a Saturday, there's going to be unity in the community. And it's going to be a great day, you know, good family fun, right? We're going to have some great entertainment out there. So if you enjoy good music, good food, if you're community minded, please come out Saturday, August 26th. It's going to be at Dansbury Park, right here in Stroudsburg, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. So come out and support and have, you know, bring the family and have a good time. And we'll see you next Saturday.